A filmmaker whose name has been on several beloved animated films and has proven to have a great sense of story is Brenda Chapman. Through her work at various studios, she has often brought humanity to the characters she has worked with, whether as a director or story artist, and it's been remarkable watching her career grow. She began her animation career at DiC, serving a variety of roles on shows like Heathcliff, Dennis the Menace, and The Real Ghostbusters. Chapman was eventually hired by Disney to work in the story department, although she also did some in-between work on Who Framed Roger Rabbit. Her first story credit was on The Little Mermaid, and at the time, the Disney story department was a boys' club, with her as the only woman on the team. Despite that, Chapman said she did not feel isolated from her colleagues, and she would prove a pivotal part in helping make Ariel a modern heroine for the late 80s, and one who continues to be celebrated and appreciated. She would also provide storyboards on The Rescuers Down Under, and then on Beauty and the Beast. Chapman worked closely with head of story Roger Allers on that movie, and would follow The Little Mermaid in creating a lead female protagonist for the current age. After Allers was hired to co-direct The Lion King, he brought her to that project where she was appointed head of story. She became heavily involved in many aspects of the production, including going on research trips to Africa and transforming the story into the big epic musical we now know. The Lion King was quite daring in its themes and the story decisions made by the filmmakers, and Brenda Chapman certainly deserves part of the credit for several of those. She would even win an Annie Award for her story contributions to the film, and in many ways The Lion King became a major calling card for her. After doing story work on The Hunchback of Notre Dame and working alongside Chris Sanders on the original story concept for the Pines of Rome segment in Fantasia 2000, Jeffrey Katzenberg asked her to come over to DreamWorks Animation to help with developing the initial projects they were setting up there. She was involved in Shrek during its long period in development and trying to figure out the best place to take the story, and also served as a story artist on The Road to El Dorado and Chicken Run. However, Brenda Chapman's biggest project at DreamWorks would turn out to be The Prince of Egypt. She has said she was initially surprised when Katzenberg told her he wanted to make an animated movie about Moses and the Exodus from Egypt, but eventually saw the potential of telling a big dramatic story that would be something different from a major animated feature. Chapman was eventually hired to direct the film, becoming the first woman to direct an animated feature for a major studio. In fact, of DWA's first 6 films, 3 were directed by women: Chapman on The Prince of Egypt, Vicki Jensen on Shrek, and Lorna Cook on Spirit, Stallion of the Cimarron. Chapman would later be joined by Simon Wells and Steve Hickner to form the directing team of The Prince of Egypt, and together they developed an excellent take on the story of Moses leading the Hebrews out of slavery in Egypt. They took the subject matter seriously and even largely avoided the common elements seen in major animated films at the time. And even though it was a musical, the songs have a different sound than people were accustomed to hearing in 90s animated films. It's a movie I greatly admire, one of my favorites to come out of DreamWorks Animation. A few years ago, I made a video praising The Prince of Egypt and getting into what makes it so fantastic. Brenda Chapman and her team did an excellent job putting the film together and making it into something special. At a certain point, she decided to leave DreamWorks and would take a crack at a few projects at other studios, although these did not happen. One was an animated adaptation of Where the Wild Things Are that Eric Goldberg was going to direct at Universal. Chapman was involved in the story development of the film, but due to creative differences with the studio, Goldberg left and that version was never made. She then jumped over to Sony Pictures Animation as it was starting up, and reteamed with Roger Allers to direct an adaptation of the Scottish ballad Tam Lin. However, Allers was then pulled onto open season, and it never went past the development stage. Shortly after, fellow story artist Joe Ranft invited her to come over to Pixar. He was co-directing Cars, which she served as a storyboard artist on. She then became part of Pixar's Creative Brain Trust, helping to provide notes and suggestions for the films. She also pitched her own movie, which was inspired by her relationship with her daughter. Originally titled The Bear and the Bow, it was eventually released as Brave and went through a difficult production. Due to creative disagreements with John Lasseter over the film, she was replaced in the director's chair by Mark Andrews, although she did retain director credit. According to Chapman, she was still proud of the way the movie came out, but is nonetheless disappointed with what happened during its production. What happened to her has been attributed to the boys' club at Pixar during that time, as they could only look at the story through a man's point of view, with Chapman also later mentioning that there was a push to give Merida less feminine traits and make her more of a tomboy. The personal story of a mother and daughter struggling to connect as the latter grows older and more independent nonetheless comes through in the film, and you do see a lot of Chapman's voice. I like Brave a lot, and it's largely through the way it depicts that relationship between Merida and Queen Eleanor, as the former wants to show her strength and the other clings to tradition. We see the difficulties that arise from this, and the film is willing to show the flaws of those characters and inability to listen to each other. Both characters grow in profound ways, and the emotions there on the screen. Chapman did bring her own sensibilities to the film, including providing her own take on the fairy tale genre that did not just repeat what Chapman had previously contributed to the Disney films she worked on. Listening to the audio commentary and even watching the film itself, it's obvious that Mark Andrews' main contributions were the broad comedy bits, especially involving Merida's mischievous brothers and her father. If I was a betting man, I would assume none of the body part related jokes were from Chapman's iteration. Brave wound up winning the Oscar for Best Animated Feature, which I don't mind, as I do like the film a lot, and it was great to see Chapman receive that recognition. By that point, she'd already left Pixar and was hired by Lucasfilm to serve as a story consultant on Strange Magic. She also returned to DreamWorks Animation for a bit to help on some projects, and even developed an adaptation of the Rumbleways books, which did not get made. After her experience with Brave, she also chose to no longer sell her own ideas to a studio to avoid the chance of being taken off of it again. She then became attached to a fantasy film titled Come Away, which became her live-action directing debut. The film combines fantasy and reality and tackles serious topics like grief, as its child protagonists, who are based on Peter Pan and Alice, escape into their imaginations. Brenda Chapman brought the same visual eye she showcased in her animated projects and worked well with the cast assembled for this movie. She successfully balanced the tones, and I was able to get invested in the main characters and the troubles they attempt to overcome. Come Away was quietly released in theaters during the height of the pandemic when few people were going, so did not receive much attention, but I appreciated what Chapman accomplished with this film. Brenda Chapman and her husband, Kevin Lima, also started their own production company to develop projects. She was at one point attached to direct a live-action adaptation of the book Ghost Squad, but then moved away from it during the pandemic. She did recently serve as executive producer on the anthology short series She Creates Change, which tells stories of 6 individual girls from different places, utilizing both live-action and animation. Brenda Chapman is an artist and filmmaker whose work I will always admire, and as you can see, she has particular talent for getting into the emotions of her characters and helping to transport us to places around the world. Whatever she ends up directing and writing next, I'll certainly be excited to see what she has done. See you next time.